He's back and he's going to mute everybody. And thanks to everybody for joining in. I'm back from Dubai. Okay, so welcome everybody. As I mentioned, I'm back from Dubai. It was very interesting. I know a number of you have been there. It's, among other things, it's a unique opportunity to be in a Muslim Arab country and be absolutely assured that if you wave an Israeli flag and wear an I Love Israel t-shirt, nothing will happen to you. Virtually no crime in Dubai, and very few locals. You see very few locals, so you really feel like you're not even in that kind of a country. And I think it's worthwhile to see it, not just because they've made peace with Israel, which is a wonderful thing, but that they are promoting a kind of openness and tolerance that you simply rarely see in any other Arab or Muslim country. So that alone was really an eye-opener. Well, you know, everybody is captivated now by the situation in the Ukraine, and it really kind of dovetails with what we're going to talk about tonight for a bit, and that is the whole issue of Parshat Zachor and Amalek. This is an example that we haven't seen for a long time of naked aggression, of attacking a country that was not belligerent, and of course, doing it in a very, really extreme fashion, indiscriminate bombing, and seems to be getting worse every day, with Russia promising that they were not going to invade and then sending a mass convoy of tanks to invade. And it reminds us that there is such a thing as evil in this world, as ambivalent as you may be and think that, well, you know, everybody can do whatever makes them happy. The truth is, as President George Bush said some years ago after the attack of 9/11, there really is such a thing in the world as right and wrong and good and evil. And I think most of the world is pretty much in agreement that what Russia is doing really borders on the evil. And it is not exactly Amalek, but in many ways, it really connects to the whole idea of Amalek, because as we'll talk about in a bit more detail, but the Torah tells us, Chazal tell us, that the first step in rebuilding Israel was to eradicate evil, and that evil was represented in its most extreme form by Amalek. So the world, especially today, is so interwoven and globally connected that Russia and Ukraine, no matter where you live in the world, you're being affected by it. And at some point, the world, if it continues, is going to have to band together in order to do something about it. But clearly, with the exception of one or two countries, everybody understands who the aggressor is and who the victim is. So not only for the Jewish community being affected, but for all the innocent people who are under the gun, we have to hope that somehow this comes to a resolution and doesn't develop into even something worse and into a true world war. And therefore, it's particularly proud of Israel's prime minister in doing whatever he can in order to try to at least broach the idea of mediation. Whether it will succeed or not is hard to say. So let's turn our attention to this issue of Parshat Zachor, first of all, because this Shabbat is, according to pretty much all the sources, the most important Torah reading of the year, which is very fascinating because, you know, we read about the Ten Commandments and we read about the Exodus from Egypt, and yet the rabbis tell us that they are not as important as Parshat Zachor, which is the only Torah reading of the year that everyone agrees is a requirement. I don't know if it's proper to call it a mitzvah. It doesn't have a bracha attached to it. One of the reasons for that is essentially you don't make brachot on things where no action is taken. Brachot done when you do a certain act. Here you're not doing any action other than coming to shul, which I guess is an action, and passively listening to the reading of this short reading taken from Parshat Ki Tetzei. As we'll see in a moment, there are two readings, two sections of the Torah that deal primarily with Amalek. And it's the latter one, near the end of the Torah, Parshat Ki Tetzei, where we have this very short 3 psukim dealing with Amalek that fulfill this commandment to remember that which Amalek did to us. The importance of Parshat Zachor is also indicated by the fact that everyone comes, including women. Now, there's a dispute about whether women are required to come for Parshat Zachor or not. The Sefer HaChinuch, which is a very authoritative book on the mitzvot, their position is that women are not required to come for Parshat Zachor because it basically involves going to war. And that is something which essentially is left up to the males to wage war. But it has become customary, and I think today the accepted opinion is that women do whatever is possible to come to shul to hear Parshat Zachor. If they can't hear it this Shabbat, they can hear the reading on the day of Purim, which is also about Amalek, and they fulfill the mitzvah with that reading as well. But it's become customary to repeat the Parsha of Zachor whenever necessary in order to fulfill this mitzvah for the entire nation. And so even though it is a debate whether or not women are required, because we generally don't want to put women in the position of having to come to things that are held at specific times in case they are busy with the children. And this would put them in an untenable position where they would be violating a commandment when, of course, taking care of the children is paramount. And so we wouldn't want to put them in that position. But when it comes to Parshat Zachor, as opposed to the other readings all year long, then we have this custom that to the greatest extent possible, women come as well. I should also mention, it's interesting in this Sefer HaChinuch that he points out and says that you can hear Parshat Zachor and fulfill this mitzvah once a year or once every 3 years, because he points out there that it was indeed, especially in Israel, interestingly enough, it was at one time the tradition to have a triennial reading, that the Torah portions were divided not so as to complete the Torah within 1 year, but within 3 years. So essentially they would read a third of the Parsha each week and complete the cycle only in 3 years. Of course, we know that at least in Orthodox Judaism, the prevalent custom is all over the world has become within 1 year. But the idea of reading it, spreading it out over 3 years was once a custom that was held legitimately. And of course, you can think about how it would affect for people always looking to be through with davening on Shabbat a little bit earlier. This would certainly help because you're only reading 1/3 of the Parsha. And the Chinuch mentions that, just as an aside. In any case, this is a very fascinating idea of remembering something. In a sense, it's almost self-contradictory, because what we say is, remember to eradicate the memory of Amalek. Well, if you eradicate Amalek, well, Zecher Amalek, the memory of Amalek, then in a sense you won't be remembering it. So it's a very unusual kind of idea that seems contradictory. So I would say that what we're really trying to accomplish here is to recognize, first of all, that there is such a thing as evil in the world, and that by thinking about it, and the Sefer Chinuch says we fulfill this mitzvah through our heart and through our lips. So one idea is we're thinking about it. We are understanding that it's important to note that we have a certain responsibility and a certain power to act in order to, I would say, help Hashem in instituting his plan for history. And part of that plan is that we have to remove evil whenever we have the ability to do so. And ultimately, that is what sets the stage for creating this more divinely attuned world where goodness reigns and where peace reigns. But we have a responsibility as well. We read it before Purim, of course, because not only because Haman, the villain of Purim, was a member of Amalek, but I think we're trying to elevate Purim, which some want to call a minor holiday, but it's really not very minor. It's so non-minor that there are opinions that say that, and this is a very extreme idea, and I don't really subscribe to it, but at the end of days, all the holidays will be somehow repealed or will not be kept except for Purim. It's a very difficult thing to say because the Torah is not going to change, even when Moshiach comes. That's one of the principles of Jewish faith, one of the Rambam's principles, that it's eternal, it's not going to change. But the idea is that Purim is something which will always remain. And one of the ideas is because this indicates that we were successful in eliminating evil and the things which prevented a more perfect world that we envision in the times of Moshiach. So we read it before Purim, as we know, because it's also a precursor, as we said, to the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash, which is really what Purim is all about. And as we've spoken before, although it's not mentioned in the text, but ultimately the whole backstory and the whole underlying plot of the Purim story is that this takes place following the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash, when Persia has taken over the empire that was Babylonia. And so, in a sense, they are in charge of what's happening in the Holy Land. And at the end of the story, Esther and Achashverosh will have a child, and that child, Darius II, will give the order permitting the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. And that's why Purim was allowed to even be entered into the 24 books of Tanakh. Otherwise, the rabbis tell us, events that take place in Chutz La'aretz, as cataclysmic as they may be, they cannot become part of the eternal Jewish calendar, in a sense. So yes, we have Yom HaShoah, but it can't be entered as an official holiday, and there's no book about it that's part of Tanakh because it doesn't take place in Eretz Yisrael. And Purim is the exception to that rule because at the end of the story, it has a major impact on the return of the Jewish people to Israel and is so connected to Israel. But the question I want to explore with you, and we've talked about this briefly before, who is Amalek? And why is Amalek so bad that we are given this very extreme commandment of genocide, that we have to wipe out Amalek, man, woman, and child, to the extent that they're not even a memory. Timched, Zecher, Amalek. Why are they more dangerous than others? We had plenty of enemies in our history. We had Ammon, we had Moab, we had Egypt that obviously treated us very, very badly. We're not commanded to wipe them out. And there must be something much more dangerous about Amalek. We have to understand, is it a racial designation? Is it a worldview that they have? Can somebody in Amalek convert to Judaism? Can a Jew become a member of Amalek? And this is a very probing idea of who Amalek is. So I just want to say a word about that first, because to clear up any confusion about Amalek. So there is a debate among the rabbis as to exactly who Amalek was. It was a tribe, and it did exist as a physical entity. And we had more than one battle with Amalek. Sometimes, by the way, they were successful. Other times, we were successful. And then, on a literal level, Amalek disappeared. Amalek does not exist in an identifiable fashion today on an individual basis, to the extent that we would have to find who they are and kill them. However, having said that, the Rambam says, along with others, that there is such a thing as the Amalek mentality. And so while they don't exist literally in terms of a bloodline, nevertheless, those who have a raison d'etre, that their whole goal in life is to kill Jews and to eradicate Judaism, they would be in the classification of Amalek. And Rav Soloveitchik and his father particularly said that clearly the Nazis were part and parcel of Amalek, that they could be defined as Amalek. It is, in a sense, a worldview. And if somebody doesn't have that view, then even if they come from Amalek, they can change. And therefore, there's this very mysterious idea that the Gemara says that the offspring of Amalek taught Torah in Bnei Brak, which seems to indicate that we didn't eradicate them. We identify who was Amalek, but they changed their posture and they actually became part of the Jewish people. Some want to even suggest, and it's only a suggestion, that perhaps refers to Rabbi Akiva. We know that Rabbi Akiva may be the greatest rabbi or Jew to live in the entire diaspora, or he lived in Israel, of course, but in history, Rabbi Akiva is, in a sense, stands alone. But some say that Rabbi Akiva was descended from converts and even perhaps from Amalek, to indicate that Amalek can change, that it's not a racial designation necessarily. Well, and that's a very fascinating discussion that the rabbis have in terms of who today would qualify as Amalek. I'm not putting Russia in that category, but the word Russia itself has pretty much a connotation that we can all relate to now. People have said there is a common saying, "Oilo Russia v'oilo Shcheno." Woe to Russia, woe to the wicked, and woe to those who live by them or live near them. And unfortunately, that's come true for Ukraine. So I want to just spend a few minutes to talk about what is the nature of Amalek, that of all the nations of the world, the Torah says they're the only ones that we seek to destroy completely. So there are two texts, as we said, that refer to Amalek. The one that we're going to read for Shabbat, again, it's very short. Zachor et asher asa lecha Amalek. Remember what Amalek did to you when you were coming out of Egypt. Asher karcha baderech, that they met you on the way. Rashi picks up on this verse, this word asher karcha, who met you. And Rashi gives three interpretations, two of which I think are very important for our discussion. The first is that the word karcha comes from the word kar, cold, that Amalek succeeded in cooling off the world that had become, let's say, passionate about the existence of God and the power of God, who intervened in history and took us out of Egypt in a way that no one had ever seen or even thought possible before. The rabbis say that no slave ever escaped from Egypt before we did en masse. This was an awakening for the whole world that there must be a God, and this God is more powerful than Pharaoh and is capable of doing miraculous things. Well, along comes Amalek and tries to dispel that worldwide connection to Hashem, to say, no, the Jews are not infallible. The Israelites, not only can they be defeated or they can be wounded, but their God can't protect them. And so, as Rashi says, it's like someone who jumps into a steaming hot bath. They get scalded, but they cool down the bath. Amalek is going to be, they're not going to be wiped out, but they're going to be defeated by Israel. But nevertheless, they're coming along to make a statement that, no, don't be so convinced that there is a God, and God is a moral God who's going to decide that if people enslave other people, that they're going to be punished for that. So that's the first explanation. It connects to actually those who are willing to kill themselves in order to attack, and also those who are going to try not only to fight against the Jewish people, but in a sense to wage war on God. The second idea that Rashi brings out on the word karcha is connected to the word mikra, and it's similar to what we said already. The word mikra means coincidence or randomness, and Amalek is trying to promote this idea that there is no God with a plan to direct the universe. Everything is random, everything is coincidence. And this, of course, goes against the primary ideas of Judaism, which says that everything happens for a reason, that there is a, if you will, a captain steering the ship, and that history is being directed towards hopefully, greater holiness and closeness to God and acceptance of a basic moral set of rules. And this is what Amalek also tries to dispel. And this is what makes Amalek so dangerous. And that's why we make this, when we read about Amalek, we say at the end of the first time we meet Amalek, ki yad al kes ya, or ka. They have their hand on the throne of God. And the word case is, or which is meant to be kisei, the throne of God, is incomplete, and God's name is incomplete, indicating that until we eradicate this mentality, God cannot have complete reign on earth. And this is our responsibility. So therefore, Milchama Lashem ba'Amalek midor dor, says the pasuk. We have to wage this war from generation to generation. So even though Amalek doesn't exist today, nevertheless, it seems that this mentality and this worldview that says things happen randomly and that there is no divine direction to the world, this has to be wiped out, because this essentially is defeating what God wants to happen in the course of the world. We use these very interesting words in describing Amalek. The reading that we're going to have Shabbat says, "Vayezanev b'cha kol hanechashalim acharecha," that they trailed after those who were weak. They preyed upon the innocent, and they attacked those who were vulnerable. For one thing, this should remind you of terrorists. Terrorists are suicidal. They are willing to kill themselves in suicide bombings. They attack the innocent. This is pure Amalek type character. But the words Vayezanev and Nechashalim clearly point to one idea. Vayezanev connects to the word Zanav, which means a tail, and Nechashalim to the word Nachash, which means a snake. And so this is a very profound kind of allusion to connecting Amalek to a snake. And I would say that we have to hearken back to one of the first stories in the Torah, in Gan Eden, in the Garden of Eden, where we also encounter the snake. And the snake tries very hard to convince Chava, and later on Adam, to convince Adam and Eve that you don't have to follow what God says. And the snake is very clever. And in a sense, this image of the snake, and it's always essentially, even though we put the snake up for the symbol of the doctors, the snake is in many places a very negative image. But here, the snake clearly was trying to use its powers of persuasion. And this is exactly what Amalek tries to do as well, but they do it in a very violent fashion. The snake was doing it more or less by talking, and Amalek by acting. And therefore, the rabbis say the principal weapon of Amalek, even though they were a violent nation, but at least of that worldview, is the idea of instilling safek. So much so that the gematria, the numerology of Amalek, equals safek, doubt. That instilling doubt within people is what the snake tried to do when it convinced Chava to eat from the tree of knowledge. And it is what Amalek tries to do when it tries to convince the world that everything is random, everything is coincidental, that there is no divine plan, and certainly that there is no relationship, special relationship between God and the Jewish people. In the story of this first battle against Amalek, so we have a very unusual and kind of mysterious situation that Moshe goes up to the top of the mountain. He tells Yoshua, you do the battle. I will stand here on the top of the mountain where you can see me, where everyone can see me. And as the pasuk says, Kasher Yarim Moshe Yado, Gavar Yisrael. When Moshe lifted up his hands, then the Jewish people were victorious. And when his hands fell down, Kasher Yaniach Yado Gavar Amalek, then Amalek was succeeding. And therefore he had his two helpers who were Aaron and Hur holding up his arms. So of course, the rabbis ask, is this some kind of magic by lifting up his hands? But he was obviously sending a message. If you believe and you have faith in God, symbolized by his pointing to the heavens, you will win, you will succeed. And if you don't have faith, then Amalek perseveres. And the pasuk then says that they hold his hands up. Vayhi yadav emunah ad bo hashemesh. This battle goes on all night until sunrise. And this strange phrase, Vayhi yadav emunah, his hands were faithful, clearly indicates that the antidote to doubt is emunah, is faith. If you believe and you maintain your faith, then no safek, no doubt can deter you from your path. But you have to have that faith. If you don't, then it's true. Amalek will persevere. Amalek will succeed, because it's very easy to believe that things just happen haphazardly. And that is a kind of test or a scenario that God presents in order to test our faith. And that challenge that Amalek presents exists to this very day. And there are many people in the world who want to believe that there's no divine plan. There's no God who is giving us a moral path to follow. And therefore, in a sense, we can do whatever we want that might makes right. And I think that's unfortunately what we're seeing in this battle taking place with Russia and Ukraine, because clearly it's immoral to attack people who aren't endangering you, aren't threatening you, no matter how you might want to pretend that they are, and believe that you can do whatever you want. And I have to say that that one of the most impressive things that the president of Ukraine said is, in one of his speeches, he said, in kind of talking directly to Putin, he said, remember, there is a God, and God sees exactly what you're doing. And now that you may think, well, that's wasted on Putin, that Russia, which tried to eradicate Judaism and to some extent religion for so much of its history. But this is what Zelensky is saying, that at the end of the day, their justice will triumph, and God sees all, and we have to have faith that we're doing the right thing. And I say we have to give them a lot of credit for having that kind of courage to stay in place. They haven't run away and made a government in exile, and to believe that we will ultimately triumph. It doesn't mean there won't be casualties and there won't be suffering, but at the end of the day, there is this sense that justice and a moral solution will somehow win the day. And I hope that certainly that's true. So the story of Amalek is not something that exists only in the distant past. True, the tribe of Amalek may not be around today, and we can't identify them. But this idea of good versus evil, of doubt versus faith, of morality versus immorality, this battle still continues to be fought. So I think that when we participate in Zachor, it's not just to think about some mystical, long dead tribe called Amalek. It's to think about the fact that God puts in a sense, he puts his faith in us, and he says, you are my representatives on earth, and humanity has to be part of the struggle, and you are waging God's war, says the Torah. When you fight this war, you're not only defeating an enemy that's against you, but it's against everything that I, God, stand for. And therefore, in a sense, you become my soldiers. And that's why I think it's appropriate that men and women are included today in this one time, this unique coming to shul, and to be present for this Torah reading, in a sense to say, yes, Hashem, we agree. We're fighting together with you for what is right and what we believe is the path that humanity should take and that the world should take. So it becomes something very relevant and not something which is consigned to a long ago past. It's really something that I think each and every one of us in our own way has to commit ourselves to. And that's why coming together on this, specifically on this one time, to proclaim our commitment to that which is good and that which is right and that which is godly is certainly an important thing, regardless of what happened long ago to Amalek. So I will stop here. If anybody has anything that they want to mention. I don't know who Yuval Harari is, Esty, so you'll have to enlighten me, because she wrote in the chat and I don't know who that is. But you can unmute yourself and tell me. You have to unmute yourself, if you can.
Okay. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So he's this famous intellectual philosopher, historian in Israel, and he's corrupted just about a large portion of the young generation of Israelis who have come from, national religious homes, with his books and his philosophy. With his book is, I think it's called Homo Sapiens, or The End of Homo Sapiens, I'm vague about the titles, but I just know about him because I've been listening to some YouTube videos, and he's horrible. And I know people whose children have been totally corrupted in their faith and turned around 180 degrees with this. So
I have to confess that I don't know anything about it. I'll have to look into it. But if what you're saying is true, then obviously we have to battle against those kinds of ideologies, and we have a lot of work to do. Okay, but thank you for bringing that up. I'll look into that. Any other comments? Yes, anyone else? Emery? Or one second, Leah, did you want to say something? Maybe not. But yeah, you have to unmute yourself if you want to talk. Maybe Tal, you can't unmute yourself there?
Can I say something?
Okay, Yehudit, go ahead.
Okay.
You've got the floor.
This is a public service message. First of all, thank you for the shiur. Children's clothing and adult clothing happen to be on sale right now, end of the season. So if you are thinking of helping out with clothing and things that the refugees need right now, this is the time to buy it. And you can get a lot of very good stuff. There's still plenty of winter left. And I'm just letting you know that because there are organizations looking for these things. You can call your local Chabad. They'll tell you, you can either drop it off there or they'll tell you who needs it. But I'm saying we have to raise to this challenge, like you just said. Hashem is watching us to be his soldiers. So there are Jewish people and others as well coming into Israel right now. And they left the Ukraine with the shirts on their back. And they need our help.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Yehudit. With that, having said that, we'll hope that this war will come to a quick conclusion and the justice will triumph, and the people who are facing this challenge will hopefully be safe and the world will come indeed to the assistance of all of those who are being persecuted. And we hope that those who come to Israel, this will, maybe the hidden bracha is that we will gain many, many more Jews who probably should have left that region a long time ago, but they come here and stay here and help to strengthen Medinat Yisrael as well.
Yep.
Everybody have a Shabbat Shalom. We will not meet next week because it's Purim, of course, and we'll meet in 2 weeks. I'll let you know. I think the time is going to 5 o'clock, but we'll send a message out because we need to change because of the times of Mincha and Marv. So it looks like we'll be going to 5 o'clock, but in 2 weeks, but we'll let everybody know. Shabbat Shalom, Purim Sameach, and thank you all for joining in.